live to New York, where world leaders have gathered for the United Nations General Assembly. They are expected to discuss a number of issues, including the war in Ukraine and climate change. UN Chief Antonio Guterres is speaking at the moment. We're going to go live to James Bays now, our diplomatic editor, who has been listening. And what has the Secretary-General been talking about so far in his opening address?
Yeah, he's painting a very grim picture of the state of the world. He started with the situation in Derna in Libya, saying the people there were victims of conflict, victims of climate chaos and victims of world leaders who are not doing enough. He says the world is in a mess with regard to conflict, with regard to poverty and inequality, and yet the world is not coming together. There's a fracturing of world leaders gathering in different blocs, and he says the basic structures of international governance, the UN Security Council, the financial organisations like the IMF and the World Bank are no longer fit for purpose. They are outdated institutions that were built for a world at the end of World War II, not for a world as it is now. Let's listen now to a little bit more of the Secretary-General as he continues his speech.
Excellencies, the peace and security architecture is under unprecedented strain. That is why, in the context of the preparations for the Summit of the Future, we put forward ideas for the consideration of member states for a new agenda for peace based on the Charter and international law. It provides a unifying vision to address existing and new threats for a world in transition, calling on states to recommit to hold free from nuclear weapons and to end the erosion of the nuclear disarmament and arms control regime, bolstering prevention at the global level by maximizing the capacity and convening power of the UN and our good offices to bridge geopolitical divides, bolstering prevention at the national level by linking actions for peace with progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, putting women's leadership and participation at the center of decision-making, and committing to the eradication of all forms of violence against women, calling for a broad-based reflection on peacekeeping and make it nimbler and more adaptable with forward-looking transition and exit strategies from the start, and supporting peace enforcement action by regional organizations, notably the African Union, with Security Council clear mandates and predictable funding. Determination for peace also requires new governance frameworks for emerging threats, from artificial intelligence to lethal autonomous weapons that function without human control. Excellencies, peace is inextricably linked to sustainable development. We see a familiar pattern around the world. The closer a country is to conflict, the further is far from the Sustainable Development Goals. The Charter calls on us to be determined in promoting social progress. In 21st century terms, that means achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet inequality defines our time. From cities where skyscrapers tower over slums, to countries that are forced to choose between serving their people or serving their debts. Today, Africa spends more on debt interest than on health care. Yesterday's SDG Summit was about a global rescue plan to scale up support from billions to trillions. And Excellencies, the international financial architecture remains dysfunctional, outdated, and unjust. And the deep reforms that are needed won't happen overnight, but we can take determined steps now to help countries where the crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic have dramatically impacted. By urgently advancing the SDG stimulus of $500 billion per year and relieving the financial burden on developing and emerging economies. By scaling up development and climate finance, increasing the capital base and changing the business model of multilateral development banks. By ensuring effective debt relief mechanisms and channeling emergency financial support towards those in greatest needs. Excellencies, we must be determined to tackle the most immediate threat to our future, our overheating planet. Climate change is not just a change in the weather. Climate change is changing life on our planet. It is affecting every aspect of our work. It is killing people and devastating communities. Around the world, we see not only accelerating temperatures, we see an acceleration in sea levels rising, glaciers receding, deadly diseases spreading, the extinction of species and cities under threat. And this is only the beginning. We have just survived the hottest days, the hottest months, and the hottest summer on the books. Behind every broken record are broken economies, broken lives, and whole nations at the breaking point. Every continent, every region, and every country is feeling the heat. But I'm not sure all leaders are feeling that heat. Actions are failing abysmally short. There is still time to keep rising temperatures within the 1.5-degree limits of the Paris Agreement, but that requires drastic steps now to cut greenhouse gas emissions and to ensure climate justice for those who did least to cause the crisis but are paying the highest price. We have the receipts. G20 countries are responsible for 80% of greenhouse emissions. They must lead. They must break their addiction to fossil fuels, stop new coal. Indeed, the International Energy Agency's findings that new oil and gas licensing by them is incompatible with keeping the 1.5-degree limit alive. To stand a fighting chance of limiting global temperature rise, we must phase out coal, oil and gas in a fair and equitable way and massively boost renewables. This is the only path to affordable, renewable energy for all. And unfortunately, many still in Africa, mainly in Africa, still lack electricity. So the fossil fuel age has failed. If fossil fuel companies want to be part of the solution, they must lead the transition to renewable energy. No more dirty production, no more fake solutions, no more bankrolling climate denial. I have laid out a climate solidarity pact in which all big emitters are asked to make extra efforts to cut emissions, and wealthier countries support emerging economies with finance and technology to do so. For example, Africa has 60% of the world's solar capacity, but just 2% of renewable investments. And I've also put forward an acceleration agenda to supercharge these efforts. Developed countries must reach net zero as close as possible to 2040, and emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, in line with common but differentiated responsibilities. And immediate steps include an end to coal by 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. An end to fossil fuel subsidies and the price on carbon. Developed countries must also finally deliver the $100 billion for developing country climate action as promised, double adaptation finance by 2025 as promised, and replenish the Green Climate Fund as promised. And all countries must work to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund this year and ensure universal early warning coverage by 2027. Tomorrow, I will welcome credible first movers and doers to our Climate Ambition Summit. And COP28 is around the corner. Climate chaos is breaking new records, but we cannot afford the same old broken record of scapegoating and waiting for others to move first. And to all those working, marching, and championing real climate action, I want you to know that you are on the right side of history and that I am with you. I won't give up this fight of our lives. Excellences,